Have you ever wondered why some moments in life seem impossible to overcome? Maybe you're facing an emotional, financial, or even spiritual storm, and you feel like you're on the edge of the abyss. But what if I told you that there is a power that can transform all that pain into an opportunity for growth? What if I told you that this power can take you from where you are right now to a place of miracles and transformation? Yes, I'm talking about faith. A faith that doesn't waver in the face of life's storms. A faith that even as small as a mustard seed has the power to uproot even the greatest obstacles. Today, we're going to explore the transformative power of faith and how it can make the impossible possible in your life. Are you ready to take that step? Are you ready to unleash the divine power within you? Before we begin, I want to ask you something. If you believe in the power of faith and want to transform your life once and for all, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any transformative content like this. Oh, and if you know someone who needs this message of hope, share this video right now. Are you on this journey together? If you believe that miracles happen when we trust God completely, leave an amen in the comments. Now keep watching and find out how you can experience the transformation that only faith can bring. When we think of faith, we often associate it with simple belief. But true faith is something much deeper and more transformative. It is not just an empty belief, but an unshakable trust in divine power, a force that enables us to face life's greatest challenges. True faith has the power to move mountains, and this is not just a metaphor. Jesus teaches us that with faith, the impossible becomes possible. And we are not talking about a faith that is limited to words, but an active faith, which translates into actions and transformation. When you decide to trust God completely, your life begins to change from the inside out. No matter what situation you are experiencing, faith is capable of bringing healing where there is pain, hope where there is despair, and overcoming where there seems to be no way out. True faith is not intimidated by obstacles. On the contrary, it challenges them because it knows that there is a divine power acting on its behalf. It makes us see beyond what our natural eyes can see, allowing us to see the glory of God in action. Every moment of overcoming becomes a testimony of what faith can do. It not only transforms our reality, but also our hearts, making us stronger, more confident, and closer to God. The power of faith is not an empty belief, but a transformative energy that shapes the lives of those who sincerely cultivate it. What does this mean to you? How has your faith been applied in your life? How have you experienced this transformation? Let's reflect on this as we move on to the next point in our journey. Imagine the scene. A grieving father, desperate for the health of his dying son. He meets Jesus, and when asked by Jesus if he believes he can be healed, he responds, "Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief." Mark 9:24. Here, Jesus makes a profound invitation to us to believe in the impossible. If you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes, he says. This passage reveals something fundamental about faith. It is not just about having great faith, but about believing that God is capable of doing the impossible, even when reason tells us otherwise. Jesus was not just saying that the impossible would become possible, but that faith, even a small amount, becomes a channel for divine power. What really matters is total trust in God, not the amount of faith we have. Unwavering faith, even in the most challenging situations, is what opens the door to God's miracles in our lives. This means that, no matter what the circumstances around you say otherwise, true faith does not bow down before the impossible. It stands up, challenges limits, and believes in the transforming power of God. Maybe you are going through a moment of crisis where the answers seem distant, but if you believe, you will see the hand of God work in ways you never imagined. This is the power of faith. It is the key that unlocks the impossible. And believe me, when you allow this faith to guide your life, miracles begin to happen. So, what are you waiting for to trust God completely? What in your life needs to be transformed? Through faith, let's reflect together because the best is yet to come. Get ready for the next lesson, where we will see how prayer can be the key to activating the power of faith in our lives. Prayer, as we know, is not just a religious practice, but a deep connection with the Creator. In Matthew 21:22, Jesus states, "And all things, whatever you ask in prayer, believing you will receive." This shows us that prayer, when accompanied by genuine faith, has the power to move the hands of God. But the key is faith, not just the words we speak. When we pray, we are not simply asking for something, but opening ourselves to God's will, aligning our hearts with His purpose. Prayer is a dialogue with the Father, where we express our desires, fears, gratitude, and above all, our trust in Him. Jesus teaches us that prayer must be done with unshakable faith. Without faith, our prayers become empty, because true prayer is born of a heart that believes in the divine power to transform our reality. But what does this mean for you in your daily life? When you pray, are you simply saying words, or are you truly believing that God will hear and answer? The power of prayer is activated by faith. So when you pray with a heart full of confidence in God's power. No matter how big your request is or what your circumstances are, if you pray in faith, you will see miracles happen. Prayer is not just a request, but an act of trust. When you pray, you are saying, "I believe God can turn this situation around," and it is this trust that moves mountains. So how about starting to apply this truth in your life? Make prayer a moment of intimacy with God, believing with all your heart that He is capable of doing the impossible. Don't miss the chance to experience the power of prayer in practice as we move on to the next point. Jesus, in His wisdom, presents us with a simple but profoundly powerful metaphor about faith. In Matthew 17:20, He says, "If you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move." What seems like a tiny seed has the power to move mountains. Here, the emphasis is not on the quantity of faith, but on its quality. The mustard seed, though small, contains within itself an immense potential for growth. What Jesus wants to teach us is that true faith, even if it seems small or simple, has the power to perform great miracles. In our daily lives, we often feel incapable of achieving great things or overcoming huge challenges. What Jesus teaches us here is that we don't need gigantic faith to see transformation happen, but rather a pure and genuine faith that is nourished by total trust in God. Even if our faith seems small, it is enough when it is rooted in the certainty that God can do the impossible. True faith does not depend on our strength or the grandeur of our requests, but on complete trust in who God is and in His power. So the next time you face a challenge, remember, the faith that moves mountains doesn't have to be big, it has to be real. No matter how small you think your faith is, when it's connected to divine power, it can transform your life in extraordinary ways. As you move forward, remember, with faith, even the impossible can become a reality. Let's see how this faith can be applied in our prayer and daily practice as we move forward. In Mark 11:24, Jesus tells us, "Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours." Here He teaches us a powerful lesson about the role of faith in our prayers. It is not enough to simply ask. We must believe with all our heart that God will hear and answer our requests. True prayer is not just a repetition of words, but an expression of our trust and faith in God. We often feel anxious, impatient, or even doubtful, wondering whether our prayers will be heard. But faith, as Jesus teaches us, is not based on what we see or feel, but on what we know about God's character. He is faithful, and His will is always for our good. When we pray with faith, We are already looking ahead to the future, believing that the answer is already on its way, even before we see it with our own eyes. This faith in prayer is not a passive faith, but an active trust, which leads us to wait patiently and act according to God's will revealed in our lives. In your daily practice, if you want to see results in your prayers, it is essential to pray with firm faith, believing that God is already working, even when the answers are not immediate. The prayer of faith is more than a petition. It is a communion with God, where our trust becomes the key that unlocks His action in our lives. So when you pray, do so with the assurance that God is listening and that He always answers in a way that is best for you. No matter how long it takes, the answer will come, because prayer made in faith is never in vain. Now, let's move on and explore how faith can actually uproot the biggest obstacles in our lives. In Luke 17:6, Jesus tells us, if you had faith as small as a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, be uprooted and planted in the sea, and it would obey you. Here, He teaches us that true faith has the power to uproot deeply rooted obstacles in our lives. The mulberry tree, which symbolizes difficulties and problems that seem impossible to solve, can be completely removed by the power of faith. No matter how big the problem, if we have faith, we can see incredible changes happen. Oftentimes, we face challenges that seem so ingrained in our lives that we wonder if they will ever be overcome. Negative thought patterns, addictions, financial difficulties, or even family conflicts can seem like huge, almost insurmountable obstacles. However, faith has the power to uproot even the biggest problems. When we truly trust in God and believe in His power, these obstacles begin to fall away, even if to our eyes they still seem firmly planted. Faith in God gives us the ability to look at these situations with a new perspective, knowing that with Him, the impossible does not exist. The faith that removes obstacles is not a passive faith that just waits for things to change. It is active, bold, and determined to make the impossible possible. So the next time you are faced with a problem that seems insurmountable, remember this lesson. Your faith has the power to remove any obstacle in your life. As you follow in faith, you begin to see doors opening and barriers crumbling by divine action. Let's now move on to the next point, where we will see how faith can transcend limits and overcome barriers. In Matthew 8:13, we find the story of a Roman centurion who, when seeking help from Jesus, expressed a faith that surprised the master himself. Go and let it be done to you according to your faith. This man, although not Jewish and outside the culture and religion of Israel, demonstrated such deep and true faith that Jesus immediately granted his request. He recognized Jesus' authority, even without seeing him physically, and believed that his word had the power to heal. This episode is a clear example of how true faith transcends any limits we impose on ourselves. The centurion was not bound by the cultural, social, or religious norms of his time. His faith was not defined by his context, but by his total trust in the power of Jesus. Faith that transcends limits is not bound by human conventions. It reaches the heart of God regardless of external barriers. This lesson is extremely relevant to us today. Often, we limit our faith by the circumstances around us, such as our problems, our background, or even our personal fears. The centurion teaches us that true faith knows no boundaries. No matter where you are in life, no matter what difficulties you face, when you believe with your heart, God acts powerfully, overcoming all limitations. Now, imagine if you were also able to believe this way, without worrying about the limits that society or even your own mind creates. Faith that transcends barriers is a bold faith, one that defies all conventions and trusts in the power of God to do the impossible. Let's reflect on this powerful lesson as we prepare for the next topic, where we will see how persistent faith can bring amazing results. In Matthew 9:22, we find the story of a woman who, after 12 years of suffering from an illness, decided to act with bold and persistent faith. She touched the hem of Jesus' cloak and was instantly healed. When Jesus realized that power had gone out from him, he stopped and said, "Daughter, be of good cheer. Your faith has made you well." Here we see how faith is not just about believing, but about taking action. Instead of passively waiting for a miracle, the woman took a bold step of faith. She approached Jesus with confidence, even though she knew that physical contact could be dangerous, since, according to the law, she was considered unclean due to her illness. This story is a shining example of persistent faith. The woman did not give up, even when doors seemed closed. For 12 years, she had sought healing without success. But she continued to believe that if she would just touch Jesus, she would be healed. This persistent faith is a model for us. Often when we face long battles, we are tempted to give up, to think that God will not answer our prayers. But as we see here, persistent and bold faith has the power to open doors and bring about a miracle, even when the situation seems hopeless. Faith that acts boldly is one that is not limited to what is visible or immediate. It goes beyond reason and continues confidently, believing that God is capable of doing the impossible. Just like this woman, we must have the courage to act, to take a step of faith, even when everything around us tells us to give up. Persistence in believing is what makes the difference. As we move forward, we will see how this persistent faith is key to the transformation we seek in our lives. Persistent faith is one of the most powerful qualities we can cultivate in our spiritual journey. In Matthew 15:28, we see the example of a Canaanite woman who, in the face of Jesus' initial resistance, did not give up on her quest to heal her daughter. Jesus responded to her by saying, "O woman, great is your faith. May it be done to you as you wish." And at that moment, her daughter was healed. What we can learn from this woman is that when our faith is true, it is not shaken by the difficulties or negative things we encounter along the way. She remains steadfast, knowing that God is good and faithful to fulfill his promises. This woman, unlike many, did not back down when Jesus said no for the first time. She persisted, knowing that her faith was enough to attract divine power. Persistent faith is not the kind that gives up when it encounters obstacles. It is the faith that knows that even when things seem to be going wrong, God is working behind the scenes. The Canaanite woman teaches us to never lose hope, to keep crying out, to persist in our trust in God, even when it seems that He is distant or unresponsive. Each step of faith brings us closer to God's answer, and persistence in faith will always be rewarded. This lesson is an invitation for us to reflect on our own faith. Have you been persistent in your prayers and requests, even when it seems that the answer is not coming? Let us now explore how this persistence can manifest itself in times of adversity as we move on to the next point. In John 11:40, Jesus says to Martha, the sister of Lazarus, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" At this point, the death of their brother Lazarus had caused great suffering in their family, and circumstances seemed to indicate that there was no hope left. But with these words, Jesus teaches us a powerful lesson about faith. When we are facing moments of great pain and despair, faith invites us to look beyond the present situation and see what God is about to do. True faith is not blind to reality, but has its eyes fixed on the glory of God, believing that He can transform any situation, no matter how impossible it may seem. At that moment, Martha had to believe that Jesus' promise would be fulfilled, even in the face of grief and apparent defeat. And that is exactly what happened. Lazarus was raised from the dead, and the glory of God was manifested in a tangible way. The faith that sees the glory of God is the one that allows us to realize that even in the most difficult situations, the divine presence and power are working for our transformation. Faith is not limited to waiting for a solution. It sees, with spiritual eyes, the glory of God revealing itself in every circumstance. In our own lives, this faith challenges us to look beyond obstacles and believe that God's glory can be manifested even in times of crisis. When we face difficulties, we cannot limit ourselves to what we see with our physical eyes. We must have faith that allows us to see beyond, waiting for God's glory to be revealed in our lives. So when you are in a time of affliction, remember, faith that sees God's glory does not limit itself to what is visible, but believes in God's power to make the impossible possible. Now let's move forward and understand how faith without seeing can be one of the most powerful ways to experience God's presence. In John 20:29, Jesus makes a powerful statement about faith. Thomas, because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. This statement, spoken to Thomas after Jesus' resurrection, reveals one of the most profound forms of faith, the faith that believes without seeing. Thomas, unlike the other disciples, did not immediately believe in Jesus' resurrection until he saw the marks on his hands. However, Jesus lovingly rebuked him, showing us that true faith goes beyond physical evidence. Faith without seeing is faith that believes in the unseen. It is not a faith that depends on tangible proof or visible experiences. Rather, it relies on the certainty of God's character and his promises, even when we do not see immediate signs. It is the faith that believes that even though we cannot see with our physical eyes, God is at work in our lives and in the world around us. This kind of faith is a great challenge for many of us because we are constantly looking for visible assurances, tangible signs. But Jesus teaches us that true faith does not depend on what we see. It is based on trust in the power and faithfulness of God, and this trust does not need visible proof. When we believe without seeing, we experience a deep peace because we know that even when everything seems uncertain, God is in control. Faith without sight invites us to trust fully, even when we cannot understand or see what lies ahead. How can you apply this faith in your life? How can we, like Thomas, learn to believe without seeing and experience the blessing of a true faith that goes beyond what is visible? Let us now continue to reflect on the faith that weathers storms, a faith that, even in the face of adversity, remains steadfast in God. In Matthew 14:31, when Peter begins to sink as he tries to walk on water toward Jesus, the Master rescues him by saying, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" This episode teaches us a vital lesson about faith in the face of storms. The scene is powerful. While the disciples are in the boat in the middle of a storm, Jesus walks on the water to approach them. Peter boldly asks Jesus to call him so that he too can walk on water. When Jesus calls him, Peter begins to walk. But soon, upon noticing the strong wind, he begins to doubt and sinks. This is a picture of many of us in our daily lives. In moments of calm and confidence, our faith seems steadfast. But when the storms of life arise, whether it's a health crisis, financial troubles, or personal conflicts, we begin to look at our circumstances and, like Peter, our faith wavers. Jesus teaches us here that when we face storms, the most important thing is to keep our eyes fixed on Him, not on the waves. When we focus on the difficulties around us, we begin to sink, but when we keep our eyes on Jesus, we find the strength to weather any storm. Jesus does not rebuke Peter for trying to walk on water, but for his lack of faith when fear took over his mind. He calls us to trust Him in all situations without letting adversity bring us down. The faith that faces storms is the one that remains firm, even when the waves are high and the wind is strong. It is not about not feeling afraid, but about not allowing fear to control us. When we keep our eyes on Christ, the storms may be around us, but they cannot destroy us. So, how is your faith in the storms of life? Have you been shaken by difficulties, or have you trusted in the power of God to sustain you? Now let's move on to the next point, where we will see how faith is able to bring peace even in the most absolute chaos. In Mark 4:40, we see Jesus calming a raging storm while he and his disciples were in the boat. When the storm threatened to sink them, the disciples woke Jesus, who was sleeping soundly, and cried out, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" Then Jesus got up and rebuked the wind and the sea, saying, "Peace, be still." And immediately everything became calm. Then he said to the disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Have you no faith?" This episode teaches us a fundamental lesson about how faith manifests itself in the midst of chaos. While the disciples were terrified by the storm, Jesus was at peace because he knew that nothing was beyond God's control. The storm represented chaos and fear, but for Jesus, the storm had no power over him. He showed the disciples that true faith is not a faith that only believes when everything is going well, but a faith that trusts God in the midst of chaos, when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Faith in the midst of chaos is not a faith that ignores problems, but a faith that knows that no matter what we are facing, God is in control. It is a faith that trusts in divine power, even when circumstances seem to scream otherwise. It teaches us to maintain our inner peace, even when the storms of life seem to threaten to consume us. Just as Jesus demonstrated, our faith in God gives us the peace of mind that comes with knowing that even in the most chaotic situations, He is with us, sustaining us. So as you face your own storms, remember that your faith can be the thing that brings calm in the midst of chaos. How have you practiced your faith in times of crisis? Let's reflect on this as we move on to the next point and discover more about how faith can transform our lives. Now that you've seen the transformative power of faith, I want to know, how has faith impacted your life? Have you experienced a miracle through faith, or are you waiting for one? Share your experience in the comments, because your story might be just what someone needs to hear today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This is crucial to not miss the next content that can change your spiritual life. And if you think this video can help someone, don't miss the chance to share it. Before I finish, I invite you to watch the next video that will appear on your screen. It is full of powerful insights on how to further strengthen your faith. I'm Valentino, and I want to thank you for being here, seeking more knowledge and more faith. May you continue to grow and see the impossible become possible in your life. Until the next video.